Macomber had not thought how the lion felt as he got out of the car. He only knew his hands were shaking, and as he walked away from the car it was almost impossible for him to make his legs move. They were stiff in the thighs, but he could feel the muscles fluttering. He raised the rifle, sighted on the junction of the lion's head and shoulders and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened, though he pulled until he thought his finger would break. Then he knew he had the safety on, and as he lowered the rifle to move the safety over, he moved another frozen pace forward, and the lion, seeing his silhouette now clear of the silhouette of the car, turned and started off at a trot, and, as Macomber fired, he heard a wunk that meant that the bullet was home, but the lion kept on going. Macomber shot again, and everyone saw the bullet throw a spout of dirt beyond the trotting lion. He shot again, remembering to lower his aim, and they all heard the bullet hit, and the lion went into a gallop and was in the tall grass before he had the bolt pushed forward. Macomber stood there feeling sick at his stomach, his hands that held the Springfield still cocked, shaking, and his wife and Robert Wilson were standing by him. Beside him too were the two gunbearers chattering in Wakamba. "I hit him," Macomber said. "I hit him twice." "You gut-shot him and you hit him somewhere forward," Wilson said without enthusiasm. The gunbearers looked very grave. They were silent now. "You may have killed him," Wilson went on. "We'll have to wait a while before we go in to find out." "What do you mean?" "Let him get sick before we follow him up." "Oh," said Macomber. "He's a hell of a fine lion," Wilson said cheerfully. "He's gotten into a bad place though." "Why is it bad?" "Can't see him until you're on him." "Oh," said Macomber. "Come on," said Wilson. "The Memsahib can stay here in the car. We'll go to have a look at the blood spoor." "Stay here, Margot," Macomber said to his wife. His mouth was very dry and it was hard for him to talk. "Why?" she asked. "Wilson says to." "We are going to have a look," Wilson said. "You stay here. You can see even better from here." "All right." Wilson spoke in Swahili to the driver. He nodded and said, "Yes, Bwana." Then they went down the steep bank and across the stream, climbing over and around the boulders and up the other bank, pulling up by some projecting roots, and along it until they found where the lion had been trotting when Macomber first shot. There was dark blood on the short grass that the gunbearers pointed out with grass stems, and that ran away behind the river bank trees. "What do we do?" asked Macomber. "Not much choice," said Wilson. "We can't bring the car over. Bank's too steep. We'll let him stiffen up a bit and then you and I'll go in and have a look for him." "Can't we set the grass on fire?" Macomber asked. "Too green." "Can't we send beaters?" Wilson looked at him appraisingly. "Of course we can," he said. "But it's just a touch murderous. You see, we know the lion's wounded. You can drive an unwound lion, he'll move on ahead of a noise, but a wounded lion's going to charge. You can't see him until you're right on him. He'll make himself perfectly flat in cover you wouldn't think would hide a hair. You can't very well send boys in there to that sort of a show. Somebody bound to get mauled." "What about the gunbearers?" "Oh, they'll go with us. It's their shorey. You see, they signed on for it. They don't look too happy though, do they?" "I don't want to go in there," said Macomber. It was out before he knew he'd said it. "Neither do I," said Wilson very cheerily. "Really no choice though." Then, as an afterthought, he glanced at Macomber and saw suddenly how he was trembling and the pitiful look on his face. "You don't have to go in, of course," he said. "That's what I'm hired for, you know. That's why I'm so expensive." "You mean you'd go in by yourself?" Why not leave him there? Robert Wilson, whose entire occupation had been with the lion and the problem he presented, and who had not been thinking about Macomber except to note that he was rather windy, suddenly felt as though he had opened the wrong door in a hotel and seen something shameful. What do you mean? Why not just leave him? You mean pretend to ourselves he hasn't been hit? No. Just drop it. It isn't done. Why not? For one thing, he's certain to be suffering. For another, someone else might run onto him. I see. But you don't have to have anything to do with it. I'd like to, Macomber said. I'm just scared, you know. I'll go ahead when we go in, Wilson said, with Kongoni tracking. You keep behind me and a little to one side. Chances are we'll hear him growl. If we see him, we'll both shoot. Don't worry about anything. I'll keep you backed up. As a matter of fact, you know, perhaps you'd better not go. It might be much better. Why don't you go over and join the Mem Sahib while I just get it over with? No, I want to go. All right, said Wilson. But don't go in if you don't want to. This is my shorty now, you know. I want to go, said Macomber. They sat under a tree and smoked. What, to go back and speak to the Mem Sahib while we are waiting? Wilson asked. No. I'll just step back and tell her to be patient. Good, said Macomber. He sat there, sweating under his arms, his mouth dry, his stomach hollow, feeling, wanting to find courage to tell Wilson to go on and finish off the lion without him. He could not know that Wilson was furious because he had not noticed the state he was in earlier and sent him back to his wife. While he sat there, Wilson came up. I have your big gun, he said. Take it. We've given him time, I think. Come on. Macomber took the big gun and Wilson said, Keep behind me and about 5 yards to the right and do exactly as I tell you. Then he spoke in Swahili to the two gunbearers who looked the picture of gloom. Let's go, he said. Could I have a drink of water? Macomber asked. Wilson spoke to the older gunbearer, who wore a canteen on his belt, and the man unbuckled it, unscrewed the top and handed it to Macomber, who took it, noticing how heavy it seemed and how hairy and shoddy the felt covering was in his hand. He raised it to drink and looked ahead at the high grass with the flat-top trees behind it. A breeze was blowing toward them, and the grass rippled gently in the wind. He looked at the gunbearer and he could see the gunbearer was suffering too with fear. 35 yards into the grass, the big lion lay flattened out along the ground. His ears were back and his only movement was a slight twitching up and down of his long, black-tufted tail. He had turned at bay as soon as he had reached this cover, and he was sick with the wound through his full belly, and weakening with the wound through his lungs that brought a thin foamy red to his mouth each time he breathed. His flanks were wet and hot, and flies were on the little openings the solid bullets had made in his tawny hide, and his big yellow eyes, narrowed with hate, looked straight ahead, only blinking when the pain came as he breathed, and his claws dug in the soft-baked earth. All of him, pain, sickness, hatred, and all of his remaining strength, was tightening into an absolute concentration for a rush. He could hear the men talking, and he waited, gathering all of himself into this preparation for a charge as soon as the men would come into the grass. As he heard their voices, his tail stiffened to twitch up and down, and, as they came into the edge of the grass, he made a coughing grin and charged. Kongoni, the old gunbearer, in the lead watching the blood spoor, Wilson watching the grass for any movement, his big gun ready, the second gunbearer looking ahead and listening, Macomber close to Wilson, his rifle cocked. They had just moved into the grass when Macomber heard the blood-choked coughing grunt and saw the swishing rush in the grass. The next thing he knew, he was running wildly, in panic in the open, running toward the stream. He heard the Sierra Wong of Wilson's big rifle, and again in a second crashing carawong. And turning saw the lion, horrible-looking now, with half his head seeming to be gone, crawling toward Wilson in the edge of the tall grass while the red-faced man worked the belt on the short ugly rifle and aimed carefully as another blasting carawong came from the muzzle, and the crawling, heavy, yellow bulk of the lion stiffened and the huge, mutilated head slid forward and Macomber, standing by himself in the clearing where he had run, holding a loaded rifle, while two black men and a white man looked back at him in contempt, knew the lion was dead. He came toward Wilson, his tallness all seeming a naked reproach, and Wilson looked at him and said, "What, to take pictures?" "No," he said. That was all anyone had said until they reached the motor car. Then Wilson had said, "Hell of a fine lion. Boys will skin him out. We might as well stay here in the shade." Macomber's wife had not looked at him nor he at her, and he had sat by her in the back seat with Wilson sitting in the front seat. Once he had reached over and taken his wife's hand without looking at her, and she had removed her hand from his. Looking across the stream to where the gunbearers were skinning out the lion, he could see that she had been able to see the whole thing. While they sat there, his wife had reached forward and put her hand on Wilson's shoulder. He turned and she had leaned forward over the low seat and kissed him on the mouth. "Oh, I say," said Wilson, going redder than his natural baked color. "Mr. Robert Wilson," she said. "The beautiful red-faced Mr. Robert Wilson." Then she sat down beside Macomber again and looked away across the stream to where the lion lay, with uplifted, white-muscled, tendon-marked naked forearms, and white bloating belly, as the black men fleshed away the skin. Finally the gunbearer brought the skin over, wet and heavy, and climbed in behind with it, rolling it up before they got in, and the motor car started. No one had said anything more until they were back in camp. That was the story of the lion. Macomber did not know how the lion had felt before he started his rush, nor during it when the unbelievable smash of the .505 with a muzzle velocity of 2 tons had hit him in the mouth, nor what kept him coming after that, when the second ripping crash had smashed his hindquarters and he had come crawling on toward the crashing, blasting thing that had destroyed him. Wilson knew something about it and only expressed it by saying, "Damn it, fine lion," but Macomber did not know how Wilson felt about things either. He did not know how his wife felt except that she was through with him. His wife had been through with him before, but it never lasted. He was very wealthy, and would be much wealthier, and he knew she would not leave him ever now. That was one of the few things that he really knew. He knew about that, about motorcycles, that was earliest, about motor cars, about duck shooting, about fishing, trout, salmon and Bixie, about sex and books, many books, too many books, about all court games, about dogs, not much about horses, about hanging on to his money, about most of the other things his world dealt in, and about his wife not leaving him. His wife had been a great beauty and she was still a great beauty in Africa, but she was not a great enough beauty any more at home to be able to leave him and better herself, and she knew it and he knew it. She had missed the chance to leave him and he knew it. If he had been better with women, she would probably have started to worry about him getting another new, beautiful wife, but she knew too much about him to worry about him either. Also, he had always had a great tolerance, which seemed the nicest thing about him if it were not the most sinister.